Hey everyone, welcome back to another deep dive into the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. As Inspector Scott Ritter has pointed out many times, this war is full of twists, turns, and strategic miscalculations. Today, we're focusing on the fast-changing situation in Kherson. A lot has happened over the past few days, and as usual, both sides are throwing out plenty of claims. But what's really happening on the ground? Well, we're here to break it down with a clear, factual lens. From reported UAV attacks, naval strikes, and strategic land gains to some serious losses for Ukraine, it's all part of a bigger picture. And that picture is becoming more evident as Russia continues to apply pressure while Ukraine faces mounting challenges. We'll go through the key developments and try to make sense of where this is all heading. Spoiler alert, it's not looking good for Kiev. So let's dig into the details and see how these recent moves are shifting the balance of power in this critical region. But what Putin has said is he's willing to stop this war here, there, on those lines, along, just a modification of the Istanbul communique. Again, to allow Ukraine to remain intact with Odessa, Kharkiv, Dnipro, part of Ukraine, an independent sovereign state, but it can't join NATO. And the banderas have to go. That apparently isn't good enough for the Ukrainians now, so that is off the table. So I'm afraid the Ukrainians are looking at a situation where this war ends, and they may not have Odessa, they may not have Kharkiv, they may not have Dnipro, they may not have Sumy. And if they keep going, they may not have Kiev. And if they keep going, they may not have a nation. That's the direction we're heading. Now the question is, can the West live with this? The West, NATO, the United States, Europe, has linked their strategic objective of the strategic defeat of Russia to the Ukraine conflict. They're using the Ukraine conflict to strategically defeat Russia, which is a problem in and of itself because Russia is a nuclear power that will not allow itself to be strategically defeated. Now the West is confronted with the fact that their gambit in weaponizing Ukraine against Russia has failed. Russia will win this. Let's talk about this reported UAV attack on the Russian airbase in Murmansk. There's been a lot of speculation around this. Some claim it was a Ukrainian strike, while others are pointing fingers at Finland as the launch point. Finland? It's a bit of a stretch, don't you think? Regardless, one thing's for sure, there's no concrete evidence yet. And until we have more facts, it's all just speculation. That being said, the implications are big. If it turns out Ukraine is escalating its UAV strikes into Russian territory, it could signify a shift in tactics. But again, until we know for sure, it's all just noise. It's not uncommon for Ukraine to make these bold claims, hoping to boost morale both at home and abroad. And we've seen this before. A lot of talk, but not always the follow-through. That's the challenge when you're trying to manage a war narrative. The need to show progress can sometimes outpace what's actually happening on the ground. Now let's also touch on Ukraine's claim that they've shot down a Russian Tu-22M over the Black Sea. If true, that would be a significant win for Kiev. But like the UAV strike, this claim hasn't been verified. Once again, we see a pattern here. Ukraine's military loves to throw out these victories as if they're trying to keep up with the scoreboard, but real evidence tends to lag behind. And let's not forget, Russia has been quiet on this front, which could mean the claim isn't as clear-cut as Ukraine would like us to believe. It's worth noting that in conflicts like this, silence from one side often speaks louder than empty claims from the other. As Inspector Scott Ritter has commented in his analyses, Ukraine often finds itself in a position where bold moves come at a steep cost. And that's exactly what we're seeing here with the recent naval operation in the Black Sea. Ukraine sent 14 high-speed boats provided by the US Navy to take control of a gas drilling platform near Crimea. I think we can all agree it's a bold move, but bold doesn't always mean smart. Out of those 14 boats, 8 were sunk. That's more than half the fleet gone in a matter of hours. The remaining 6 barely made it back, and the operation was an utter disaster. Roughly 80 Ukrainian soldiers lost their lives in the process. Think about that for a moment. 80 soldiers lost in an attempt to take a platform that wouldn't have significantly changed the course of the war, even if they had succeeded. This isn't just a tactical failure, it's a strategic misstep. We've seen this before from Ukraine, throwing everything at risky operations that don't seem to have a long-term payoff. And the equipment? Courtesy of the US military. So it's not just Ukrainian lives on the line here, it's also Western hardware being lost at an alarming rate. Is this how Ukraine wants to use its precious resources? At some point, Kiev needs to start thinking about sustainability because, at this rate, they're burning through everything they've got, including foreign aid, without much to show for it. Now let's turn our focus to the ground war. specifically in the Kursk and Sumy regions where Russia's tactical offenses have been gaining momentum for weeks now. We've seen Russia adopt a surgical approach, targeting Ukrainian positions with precision and persistence. Unlike the flashier, high-risk operations we're seeing from Ukraine, Russia is taking a methodical approach, slow and steady, but very effective. Just yesterday, Ukraine tried to break through Russian lines near Glushkovo. They sent in a decent-sized force-armored vehicles, infantry, and even Leopard tanks. Yes, the Leopards, those Western-supplied tanks that were supposed to turn the tide of battle. But as we've seen, having advanced hardware doesn't always mean you'll win the fight. Russia's forces were ready. They brought in reinforcements quickly, repelled the assault, and pushed Ukraine back. The cost to Ukraine? 13 armored vehicles destroyed, about 40 soldiers lost, and the kicker, 3 Leopard tanks gone. Think about the cost, not just in terms of equipment but in the human toll. Ukraine is losing both men and machines at a rate that's simply unsustainable. And here's the thing. While Ukraine is throwing some of its best units into these battles, Russia is carefully choosing its moments, ensuring that when they strike, it's decisive. This is a clear pattern. Ukraine, despite all its Western support, is finding itself outmatched when it matters most. The question is, how long can they keep up this level of loss? As Inspector Scott Ritter has consistently noted, Russia's ability to adjust quickly on the battlefield is a key factor in their success. Over the past few days, Russian forces have regained about 200 square kilometers of territory in the Kharkiv region. That's no small number. This is roughly a fifth of the land Ukraine had managed to capture earlier in the conflict. And these aren't just empty fields we're talking about, strategic areas that give Russia a stronger foothold in the region. Villages like Abovka, Sagas, and Chernobyevka have fallen back into Russian hands, and Ukraine's forces are struggling to hold the line. Russia's tactical response has been sharp and effective. When Ukraine tried to cut off Russian logistics by targeting temporary bridges, Russia adapted quickly, opening new supply routes from Kursk. This kind of rapid response is what sets the Russian strategy apart. Ukraine seems to be reacting while Russia is planning several steps ahead. Now Ukraine is in a tough spot here. They've thrown everything at disrupting Russian logistics, but Russia's flexibility on the battlefield has minimized the damage. With new supply routes in place, Russia's forces in the area are well positioned to keep pushing forward. Ukraine's attempts to disrupt the flow of reinforcements and supplies have so far been largely ineffective. This is the problem when you're facing an opponent that knows how to play the long game. Ukraine is running out of options, and fast. Ukraine's current situation around Glushkovo is becoming more desperate by the day. They know that if they don't act soon, they're going to lose their grip on the region. But every time they attempt to push, Russia is ready. This isn't the first time we've seen Ukraine adopt this kind of strategy, repeated assaults, hoping that eventually one will break through. It's the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. And it's not just about the land. If Ukraine loses Glushkovo, they'll lose one of their last footholds in the Kharkiv region, forcing them into weaker defensive positions elsewhere. We're talking about a potential retreat that could cost Ukraine far more than just a few square kilometers. They're putting their best forces on the line, and every failed attack weakens them further. Russia's steady reinforcement of key areas around Kharkiv is turning the tide, and Ukraine's commanders must be feeling the pressure. They've already suffered heavy losses, and their ability to continue launching these kinds of offensives is clearly waning. Looking ahead, all eyes are on Lyman. If Ukraine loses control of this area, it could be catastrophic. Their supply lines from Slovyansk to Kramatorsk would be cut, and that would essentially strangle their ability to reinforce their front lines. It's not just about holding ground, it's about maintaining the ability to fight. Without those supply lines, Ukraine's position in Kharkiv will crumble. Russia is making steady progress toward Lyman, and it's clear that this is where the next major push will happen. The strategy is straightforward: cut off Ukraine's options, force them into a retreat, and consolidate gains. And here's the thing, Ukraine's forces, though still strong, are becoming stretched thinner with each passing day. Russia's ability to maneuver around key defensive points is putting Ukraine on the back foot, and unless Kiev pulls off something truly extraordinary, the fight for Kharkiv could be over sooner rather than later. So, where does this leave us? As Inspector Scott Ritter has often said, wars are won not just through brute force but through strategic adaptability. Right now, Russia clearly has the upper hand in this region. They've regained significant territory, and they're positioning themselves for even bigger victories in the days ahead. Ukraine, meanwhile, is running out of room to maneuver. Their losses are mounting and their strategic options are narrowing. Russia's next move will likely be decisive, and as always, we'll be here to cover every development as it happens. Stay with us, because next, we're taking a closer look at the geopolitical fallout of these battles and how Western involvement is shaping this conflict in ways you might not expect.